Hi, guys. Sean and I have some exciting news. We have created official Twitter and Instagram accounts for the Oh Mr. Sheffield podcast. It is at Oh Mr. Chef Pod on both platforms, and that is Oh Mr. Chef with two F's. So Oh Mr. Chef Pod. Check it out. Follow us. It's going to have all the latest and greatest from us about this show, and we hope you like it.
Now enjoy the episode.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Hello, and welcome to Oh Mr. Sheffield, a podcast about 90s hit sitcom The 90s.
God, we are rusty. Listeners, we took 2 weeks off, and we don't even know what we're doing anymore.
Hi, I have brain damage. This is a podcast about The Nanny. It's a TV show. And I'm Shanti Pasquale here with Toria Sheffield.
Hello.
We are talking about episode 15, season 1 of The Nanny. It was called The Deep Throat, and it was directed by Linda Day, and it was written by Pamela Eels and Sally Lapidus. And it is a pretty good episode. It's the one in
episode
which...
where...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to step on your line.
No, do it. You're better off. You're better.
It's the episode where Fran gets her tonsils out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have your tonsils?
I do, and they're inflamed at all times. And I was one of those people who I went to the doctor a lot when I was a kid for strep throat. And every time I went, they would be like, well, if you just get it one more time this year, we'll take your tonsils out. And then I wouldn't get it. And that happened every year of my life, basically, until I was old.
I have mine, but my sister was sickly like you, and she did get them out for the same reason when she was 13, and changed her life. You could be a different.
My life is a living hell because of it to this day, and I don't understand why my mom just didn't go like, no, they need to be removed. But like, yeah, I have like speaking problems, I have breathing problems. It's all definitely related to my super enlarged tonsils. But.
Wow, so we already know who the Fran of this episode is. Okay. So this episode starts off, all the children in the house are sick, and Niles and Fran are waiting on them hand and foot.
Yes.
And also,
which only happens so they can call back to it at the end.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it also, yes, absolutely. I'm going to bring this up, but then I'm going to put a pin in it because I want us to circle back to it later for like an extended thing with Nanny Trivia. But did you notice there was also like one of those gay jokes that we've been tracking where there was this really funny line where like they're serving the children, toast, and Niles is like, yes, like I remember when I was a child and like my mother used to hold me close to the fire when I was ill and make me toast and blah, blah, blah. And Fran has this funny line where she's like, Niles, we love you, but like it's better if you remain a mystery. So it was almost like don't overshare. Like we don't want to know about your personal life. And then he says, oh, and after I've listened to so many stories about your multifarious family. Multifarious meaning many and various types. But then Fran goes, oh, only my Uncle Harvey is multifarious. Meaning, I think he meant the derogatory term fairy. And then she goes, but when he sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow, you'd swear Judy Garland was in the room. And that's like the bump bump. And then they go into the opening credits. And there's a reason that I want to put a button in that for later, but I'm just calling some attention to that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the B plot is we find out that Mr. Sheffield is going to accompany Cece to her college reunion with her sorority sisters.
Yeah. And so she's like super concerned the first half of the episode that she's going to get sick or that Mr. Sheffield's going to get sick. And this is like, this whole episode heavily hinges upon Cece being like A, the worst person alive, and B, like the loneliest person on the planet. Like this whole episode is hinged around like Cece's life is pathetic because she's old and unmarried and has no prospects. And it's sad. And we're going to show you how sad it is. That's what I think the whole episode hinges on. In fact, I would argue that it is a actually pretty thin, kind of weak episode that I felt like was only built around Cece scenes, even though that's the B plot. Because nothing happens in the A plot.
I slightly disagree. It was a weirdly paced episode where the thing that happens really late.
Is it because she says "I love you"?
Yes, the thing that we talked about this before in the show. The thing that you think would like start off the episode and be like the central tension of the episode actually happens like 17 minutes into a 22-minute episode. And sometimes we say that like maybe it's because when there's a bunch of like B and C plots hanging out and they don't really know what to do with them, they throw them into one episode. And it kind of felt like that could have been happening here because it's like, so technically the A plot is that Fran takes little Gracie to the doctor and then finds out that she has to get her tonsils out. And so it's like, okay, Fran's going to go into the hospital and have this surgery. And technically this more minor thing is this CC reunion thing. But
it's so interesting to me that you see, I interpret it completely differently. I looked at it as they had like a thing they wanted to do for the episode. They broke the episode. And then as a means to justify why all of this happened, they threw in this line at the end of Fran saying, "I love you," but then very quickly sort of undo it one scene later by her saying, "I love you" to different people.
We don't want to confuse all the listeners that have never seen this episode before.
I mean, again, I'm going to have to preface this whole episode by saying, if you haven't seen this show, you should definitely watch it before you listen to these episodes.
But I have heard some people say they prefer to listen before because then it gives them new context and texture. Well, okay. You know what? Since it's kind of like, I feel like we have a lot to talk about, the just basic plot points of this episode so everybody knows is Fran goes in for the surgery and they put her under anesthesia and now
we should back up. We didn't even say. So basically the kids are sick. They go to the doctor. In the process of being at the doctor's like, "You guys just have the flu," and then looks at Fran's throat and is like, "But you have like tonsillitis. You need to get your tonsils removed immediately." And that's how she ends up in the hospital. She doesn't want to go at first. Then she decides, okay, I'm going to go. And everyone's semi-worried, but not really. But it's enough of an excuse to get Mr. Sheffield to go to the hospital instead of going to Cece's reunion. And that's sort of like, and then she gets put under on anesthesia to go get her tonsils removed. And she's like, ditzy and
loopy. She's super loopy. And she looks at Mr. Sheffield and she's like, "I love you," as they wheel her out. Mm-hmm. But that happens late in the episode. That's not like a first act plot point. No. It's like, this is, much more well into things. Yeah. But yes, it also creates this situation where then Cece ends up having to go to the reunion alone. And Mr. Sheffield's like, "I'll meet you there, like as soon as Miss Fine is out of surgery, blah, blah, blah." So we keep kind of cutting back between Fran in the hospital and Cece at this reunion with all these catty women. We also have another great moment of physical comedy. I think it's our second big moment of physical comedy after the Gracie's imaginary friend thing. Yeah. Basically, when Fran has to spend the night in the hospital before her surgery, she's sharing her room with this old elderly woman who's like completely passed out. And Fran looks up at the TV and she's like, "Oh, a Menendez Brothers special." And she's like, "Let me turn up the volume." And she grabs what she thinks is the remote control, but is what is actually the thing that's controlling how elevated this elderly woman's bed is. So while Fran is pointing the remote at the TV and like aggressively pushing it up and down, we just see this woman behind her, like basically getting flopped around like a Weekend at Bernie's corpse. Yeah. Which tonally feels different than so much of what we normally see from this show. But I think it's just a preview of what I think is to come in the later season.
I was going to say, though, that actually, I actually wrote in my notes, like this physical bit didn't do it for me. It just didn't. It was okay, but I feel like the physical comedy we've seen before and where we'll get to eventually, I've brought up several times, it feels very I Love Lucy. It feels very Lucille Ball. But I think the key to that is that it was Lucy doing the physical comedy. And when it works at its best on the show, it's Fran being put in that situation. And this felt a little more like they just like were like, "Oh, this is a funny gag. And like, we'll just do this gag."
It felt almost like a fart joke. Like it was like a little beneath the physical comedy that we've seen thus far.
Well, because it was beneath the characters, right? It wasn't, to me, it didn't work as a successful physical comedy bit because it was almost too cartoonish.
Yeah. Though the type of comedy that I thought worked really well for this episode is in the scene where Fran is taking Gracie to the doctor. She's pocketing all of the shit.
Yes.
She's like, there's like cotton swabs and Q-tips and those like popsicle stick things. And she's explaining to Gracie like all the ways that these will be useful at home.
Yes.
Which I thought was a great little gag.
There were also some strong one-liners in this episode.
Yeah. Before we get into segments, I wanted to just also quickly wrap up what happens, which is basically she gets super loopy, says I love you to Mr. Sheffield. And so while she's in surgery, he is talking to Niles and he's basically like pulling his hair out. And he's basically like, Niles, what am I going to do? Like, you heard Miss Fine. She's in love with me. Like, poor girl. Like, how could I not have seen it? And he goes spiraling into this sort of like, oh, I'm going to have to let her down easy mode, which is also revealing that he secretly is very pleased with this because he'll say, he's saying things like, oh, she's secretly in love with me. And here I am thinking she's just a nanny. I mean, not that she's not charming and attractive and, has that special little way with her smile, but oh goodness, and so he's completely like, he's spiraling, at which point they wheel Fran back into the room post-recovery, and she's just saying I love you to everyone, like all of the male nurses and like a bed that she sees, and they quickly realize that she was just basically drunk. And it's like a completely humbling comedic beat to Mr. Sheffield.
Yeah, she's just high on the drugs that they gave her.
Yeah, and Niles literally cackles as he leaves the room.
And then eventually Mr. Sheffield shows up at the reunion, but everybody's already gone. Like literally the whole reunion bit is just so they can have one scene where Cece's alone at the reunion and these two other women just make Cece feel like shit for being single and childless, even though she's like very successful in her business and she's like a rich lady, obviously. But they're just like, oh, you don't have any kids or a husband? Like, you're the worst person that ever lived. And she just gets really, like, it was like, just like sad, honestly. It just made me feel bad for Cece. And then like the episode ends, as I mentioned, like with a callback to the beginning, which is now Fran and Niles has now got a cold and Fran is recovering from having her tonsils taken out. And the kids are now taking care of Fran and Niles, who are like annoyingly ringing this like bell to like get the kids' attention. And then the button of the episode is, and I'm going to say this as delicately as possible, Cece drinks a cup of piss. And I just wrote that with 3 question marks. And then my additional note afterwards was, I don't know, maybe the weakest app. Because it was also, I mean, from our weird, like, analytical standpoint, it was also equally lazy joke writing where they go for physical comedy that is so unbelievable that it starts to feel like cartoonish. Where it's just like, we have to assume that Cece A, would just pick something random up off the table and pour herself a glass. B, that she wouldn't smell the piss before she took a drink of it. C, that there's just so many questions.
Wait. For context, basically, Fran is lying on this couch and she doesn't have a voice because she just got her tonsils out. And then Cece walks in and she's like relishing the fact that she can say whatever she wants to Fran. And for once, Fran can't say anything back. So she sits down next to Fran. She says something extremely snide and then takes a sip of something that looks like apple juice. It's like in a bottle. And then Fran has this little board she's been writing on to be able to communicate. And she just writes something, turns it around and says, that's not apple juice. And that's the button in the episode. And my note was, who's peeing in a bottle? Like they can both walk. Also, why would Fran be the one peeing in a bottle? Wouldn't she need like more than a bottle? So it must be Niles. But again, as far as we know, they're in this fancy multi-million-dollar living room and they're peeing in bottles. Like it's very strange. It was a joke that it was not a grounded joke. But hey, that was the freeze frame of the episode, and hey, Cece drank it.
And she like fully drinks it too, because it ends on her like with it in her mouth going like, oh no, making like a face. But it was done in that like Wile E. Coyote steps off the cliff, looks down, realizes he's stepped off a cliff, and then falls. And it was like she smelled the piss, tastes the piss, and then Fran tells her, oh, that's not apple juice. And she's like, derp. And
I wish it so badly that the HBO description of this was something like Fran gets her tonsils out, Cece drinks piss. That'll be the description that we put on the set. I don't know why. It just gets funnier and funnier the more that I think about it.
It really does. I mean, maybe that's why they did it. You know, writers' rooms, especially like old school writers' rooms. I feel like a lot of times it was just whatever made them laugh. You know.
Yep.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Okay, well, let's get into our segments.
And now, segments.
So, segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
To say we can move on to our segments.
And now, segments.
Segments with Sean and Toria.
All right, Yiddish. So, did you clock the word genug when at the beginning the kids are ringing the bells and Fran yells, "Genug with the bells already"? Yep. Genug means enough in Yiddish. Pretty simple.
Yes.
There's a lot of context clues in that one.
Mm-hmm. But there was another word. Oh,
no, go on.
Were you done with Yiddish? Okay, so there was another word that it's not a Yiddish word, but there's a joke where when they go to the doctor, Gracie says, but Fran, you said I don't want a gentle doctor. And then Fran goes, no, that's Gentile.
Yes. So basically, the doctor comes in and he's like, don't worry, I'm gentle. And that's when she's like, but Fran, you said you don't want a gentle doctor. Yeah.
So a Gentile, I don't know how, is that like a common?
That's not Jewish. Like Gentile is not a Jewish related word. It does mean a non-Jewish person, but like the word Gentile appears in like I think Shakespeare. It just means not Jewish.
Yeah, but Shakespeare was Jewish, wasn't he?
What do you know?
I'm just kidding. But yeah, no. Well, I mean, I don't know, because it just felt to me like that was a word I heard all the time growing up, and it was always in like a semi-derogatory, like, oh, they're Gentiles.
Let me see. Gentile origins.
So
Google,
I don't know.
Tell us. It's Latin, late Middle English. It's a Latin.
Just means non-Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a word that Jews made up. So it's if anything, it sounds like now I feel like, oh, is that just like an anti-Semitic way for non-Jewish people to identify themselves as non-Jewish?
Well, okay, I'm getting mixed definitions. This will be good for correction corners next week. But the word stems from the Hebrew term goy, which means a nation. So, but okay, there could be some.
I knew it. I knew it.
I knew it.
It's a goyish cup. All right.
Sean knew, but okay. Then you had mentioned this earlier. There was a ton of great one-liners. I just literally have like one-liner after one-liner written down here that I love.
Same. What are yours?
See, when Cece thinks that Mr. Sheffield might miss her sorority party, she goes, "Maxwell, you wouldn't leave me hanging." And Niles goes, "No, we'd cut you down in a week or two." And I just wrote savage.
Always.
Savage. When Fran is talking to the comatose woman next to her in the hospital, she goes, you're a great little listener. And then when the doctor brings Fran back from surgery, he goes, her adenoids were quite remarkable. I was afraid if I removed them, her head would collapse.
Yes. Yes, because of her they ask her to remove some of her adenoids to maybe change her voice quality. Yeah. I really liked another Savage Niles line as Cece says something to him about like, oh, what do I care about your opinion? You're just the servant. And Niles just without missing a beat goes, well, at least when I offer something, people take it. And she just looks pained, and it's such a good line.
Yes, it was like slightly meaner. It was like, at least people take what I give, or I don't know. There was a more sexual undertone to it, which was great.
And then there was also the nurse. This nurse walks into the room, and she walks in and she goes, she looks right at Niles and she goes, "I'm Nurse Smith. Get in the bed." And he goes, "I'm not the patient." And she goes, "Oh, I know." And,
I have that note too.
I thought that was the funniest thing.
I was like, weird, like horned up nurse.
Yeah. She's like, "I want you, stuffy British guy."
Yeah. I also have the note that I'm like, I love Niles and I love when he's on screen, but don't you think it's weird that he's also there at the hospital when they're all getting her ready? Like they've just definitely like, and you see this in a couple episodes coming up, they're just now like finding any excuse to have them all together, even when it wouldn't be realistic for like the butler to be in a situation.
Yes, to the point where in the next episode, I believe, they have him there and it's so out of place. They actually give him a line to sort of justify why he's there.
Yes.
And it's ridiculous and it doesn't sell. And you're like, okay, whatever, nanny writers.
Yeah,
sure.
They just want Daniel Davies in this situation.
Hey, listen, good for him. It means he got paid, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What else?
Okay, so...
Oh, I also like that Fran called him Shister Methfield. Made me laugh.
Shister Methfield. When she was drunk.
Yeah, when she's all
loopy.
When she's all loopy on the anesthetic.
Okay, so today's nanny trivia / correction / nanny out in the world. It's a little bit of a big one, but I think it's like definitely worth giving it its due. And this is circling back to how I mentioned that there was that gay joke earlier in the episode. And when I first watched it, I kind of went, oh, there's another sort of like outdated, like kind of like, oh, the joke is that someone's gay situation happening from 1994. But then I happened to come across an article when I was Googling some stuff, and it was May 3rd from logo.com. And it's an article specifically about the nanny's exceptionalism in terms of gay acceptance at the time. And by the way, Logo is like an LGBTQ site that like specializes in stories like that. And I'll say this with the caveat, Sean and I are both straight, boring people. So we don't necessarily always know the ins and outs. We try.
No pun intended.
And this article also refers to a recent YouTube video from a queer pop culture connoisseur named Matt Baum. So this Logo article was written by Christopher Rudolph, who is himself a gay culture writer. So it's an article that also talks about a YouTube video. So
bona fides. They got their bona fides.
Yeah. They are certified gays. They got their gay cards, and so we should trust them. But so Christopher Rudolph writes, if you've been on gay Twitter at any point over the past few weeks, you've probably noticed that everyone is watching The Nanny. The classic 90s sitcom starring Fran Drescher was only available on DVD until last month when it finally hit HBO Max. Now people are rediscovering the zany antics of Fran Fine and the Sheffield family. The Nanny has long been beloved by queer viewers for its sarcastic humor and I Love Lucy-inspired plots. But how are gay people treated on the show? The 90s were a tricky time for LGBTQ acceptance on network television, with some of the most popular series of that time, We're Looking at You, Friends, featuring homophobic jokes and storylines. Thankfully, The Nanny was pretty ahead of the curve, according to queer pop culture connoisseur and YouTuber Matt Baum. In his latest video, Baum explores how the show handles gay characters. In his opinion, the sitcom passes the test, with queer people almost never being the butt of the joke. Their sexual orientation is treated with little drama or concern. Mr. Sheffield does work in the theater, after all, which makes sense since Drescher co-created The Nanny with her ex-husband, Peter Mark Jacobson, who eventually came out as gay.
Oh!
Right? I was like, but it says their post-marriage friendship was the basis for Drescher's TV Land sitcom Happily Divorced. And then, so I actually ended up, let's see. Oh, wait. Skipping ahead. So I wrote here a note to myself. If listeners want to see the video that they're talking about on YouTube, it's from Matt Baum, Baume, and it's entitled "The Nanny: Fran's Fine with the Gays." And then so I watched the video, and
we'll link it too. It'll be linked in the description of this episode.
Well, the thing that was really interesting is that he specifically calls out a joke that you and I had clocked as offensive. And it's specifically when Niles is like, I'm feeling a bit queer. And Fran goes, oh, Niles, like, come out of the closet already or something. And then they, like, that was a joke. Yeah. And you and I interpreted it as, oh, the joke is that, oh, Niles is gay and people are laughing at that. He specifically includes that to say, this joke isn't about Niles being gay. It was that Fran misunderstood him when he said the word queer. And then, even more significantly, she encourages him to come out and then completely breezes past it. In fact, he makes the point that The Nanny, unlike many other shows of the time, has a pattern of breezing past the fact that someone is gay, which was entirely revolutionary for the early 90s. And I just wrote, so that was me sort of summarizing this video.
That's true. That's very, very, first of all, we should get that guy on as a guest.
Yeah. I mean, I was like,
we should reach out to the YouTuber. Like, it's a YouTube guy, right? We just reach out and be like, hey man, we're doing the Nanny podcast. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We read an article about your video and now we'd really like to talk to you. Like, why not? It can't hurt. I'm going to reach out to that guy.
And it like kind of just, was reminded me that because you and I, are kind of constricted by our own perspectives and experiences, there was like this whole other side to this show and this story that we didn't even know. And we love the show and we're doing a podcast about this show. So it was a bit of a wake up call. And then I also wrote that like, it's an interesting perspective from someone who's actually a member of the LGBTQ community. And I found a ton of other articles and think pieces from other gay culture writers singing the praises of this specific show. And I just made me remember that like, it's easy to be very judgy of past art and entertainment because it's regressive by today's standards. And then we forget how it actually really helped move the needle forward in its own time.
Fascinating. It also is a good segue to mention that we will no longer be doing this show because we realize we're completely unqualified to be talking to you every week about The Nanny. Goodbye.
We will let ourselves out. And then go to a lot of sensitivity seminars.
And meet your new hosts, a proper LGBTQ person and another person.
Yeah. But it was just, I was kind of blown away by this. I was super fascinated and I wanted to share that with our listeners because it was really cool.
That's awesome. I mean, that's, I watch a lot of older stuff with Elizabeth, who's younger than me. Sometimes we'll watch stuff that we don't, that she hasn't seen before. And she'll initially, she'll do the same thing we did, which is like, she'll be like, oof, like that stuff just doesn't work anymore. And there's been a couple of things where I was like, I don't know. I can distinctly remember as a kid that this was like a big deal that they were even doing this and at all, even if they weren't doing it right. Like I'm trying to think of an example. We watched something recently and it was something about race and she was like, it doesn't really work. And I was like, yeah, but the fact that they were even talking about it and doing it this way was like a big, like, I can remember that being like, whoa, that's cool that they did that. So yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense that it would apply also to this show, certainly, even more so once you have that information about her ex-husband and all that. That's really fascinating. It's pretty cool. It's a great show. I mean, look, it's a great friend of mine recently was like, I started rewatching that show because you've been doing the podcast about it. So I figured I'll watch one of them. And he's like, I don't know. I never really watched it much, when I was younger. And he was like, it's great. The writing is fantastic. I was like, yeah, dude, it's awesome. Like,
I know.
These two are fire. They're great creators. They put together a great writing staff. Like they're fantastic. What a great creative team. It makes me want to go and watch all of the other shows they worked on together.
Yeah.
What else? Wait, is that it?
Fran or the Cece. I feel like we stab. Yeah. Well, it depends on how you want to spin it. You could be the Fran because you're riddled with those health problems. But I said, my note was, I guess we're both Cece's because we're both old, childless, and unmarried. But I guess maybe that applies less to you as a man in our culture. So I guess I'm the CC.
I mean, I'm also in a 5-year relationship, and I recently bought an engagement ring. So,
Does she live are we hearing it here first? Can we share that on the pod?
Well, so I did the math, and this episode won't come out until after I've already asked.
Oh my God.
I also did the math, and Elizabeth doesn't really listen to this podcast, it turns out. So,
I mean, nor should she. That's fair. Oh my God, I just got so excited.
Yeah. It was really cute. I was having, not to fall into any stereotypes, but I was having a lot of trouble, like just pulling the trigger and doing it and spending an amount of money. And my mom and my sister was visiting, and my sister was like, you just do it now. Like, just show me the ring. And I was like, okay. And I brought it up, and I was like, this is the one, and da-da-da. And she was like, she just clicked it. She was like, there, it's bought. We're doing it.
I mean,
like,
well, they say it's supposed to be like 3 months salary or something. It's like some.
Yeah, sounds about right.
So for you, that's what, like
$800. It's 10 years salary. No, for me, it equates to just like 10 years of work, and I was finally able to, 5 years that we've been together.
I have so many questions, but I guess I won't bore listeners. I want to be like,
hey, we'll save it for part 2. No,
part 2 when we talk about how Liz said no, and this.
Yeah, check back 15 episodes from now when it opens with me sobbing.
It just sounds like Sean's been drinking a lot.
Hello, welcome to Toria Sheffield podcast with the nanny. I'm your co-host, Fran Drescher. Good night.
No, I'm really excited. I get very excited about this stuff.
Thank you. It's very exciting. Everyone, please be as excited as we are to listen to this podcast and like it and share it and leave comments on Apple Podcasts and all of the places that you can do so, and send it to your friends on Twitter and all that stuff. And you can also check us out on anchor.fm/thenannypod, and you can leave us a voicemail if you want. You can do it. Please do it. Please leave just one voicemail. Even if it's like, you don't have to like identify yourself, do a weird voice or something. It would just be fun. I'm going to start leaving us voicemails just so I have something to play. I think you can find me on Sean Wrights at Twitter, and you can find Toria where? Toria Sheffy, 2 F's and a Y on Instagram. All right, everybody. That's a podcast. Thank you for listening. Bye, Toria. Bye.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing. The nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.